Hello, my name is Scarlett. I want to tell you about my journey, how I learned to think first and speak smart. I was not always like this. There was a time when I used to speak without thinking, and it caused many problems. But slowly, I changed. I learned to pause, to think, and then speak with purpose. I never realized how sharp my words were until they started cutting people I cared about. Back then, I thought speaking quickly was a sign of confidence. I thought being clever and witty meant I was smart. I didn't know that quick words without care were like throwing stones in a glass house. Everything breaks, but you don't always hear the sound until it's too late. I still remember one day in 8th grade. It was a normal Monday morning, the air still a bit cold, and my mind half asleep. I walked into the classroom, dropped my bag on the floor, and sat down without saying much. That day, my friend Jenna came to school with a huge smile on her face. Her dark brown hair, usually straight and neat, had been chopped short into a bob and curled at the ends. She looked proud and excited. Her eyes were glowing. "Look, Scarlett," she said, spinning around a little. "Do you like my new haircut?" I looked up at her, and without a moment of thought, I laughed and said, "It looks like you got in a fight with a lawnmower." I didn't even wait for her reaction. I just laughed and went back to digging in my bag for my notebook. But in that split second, her smile disappeared. She didn't say a word. She just turned around slowly and walked back to her seat. The classroom, which was always buzzing in the morning, suddenly felt quieter. At first, I didn't feel anything. I thought it was a harmless joke. I even told someone else nearby, "Jenna got a haircut? It's kind of wild, right?" I didn't notice how she kept her head down the entire class. Didn't raise her hand, even though she always did. Didn't even look at me once. I didn't think about it again until lunch. We usually sat together with a few other girls, but that day, Jenna wasn't there. I scanned the lunchroom until I saw her sitting alone in the corner. Her head was down, and she wasn't eating. Guilt started to rise in my stomach, but I pushed it away. I told myself, she's just being sensitive. It was a joke. People need to stop being so soft. But later that day, in the girls' bathroom, I heard something that changed everything. I was washing my hands when I heard sniffles coming from one of the stalls. Then I heard another voice, Jenna's best friend from another class. She said, "I'm so sorry he said that. Your hair looks really nice, Jen." She said it, Jenna replied through tears. "Scarlett, I thought she was my friend." I froze. My hands were still under the running water. My face turned red. I wanted to walk out, but my legs felt stuck. I realized then that it wasn't just a joke. It wasn't funny. It was painful, and I was the one who caused it. I walked back to class with a heavy heart. That whole afternoon, I couldn't focus. My teacher's voice faded into the background. I just kept hearing Jenna's voice. I thought about the look in her eyes when I made that comment. How had I missed it? Why didn't I stop myself? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. I began to remember other times I had said things without thinking. Times when I made fun of a boy's voice because it cracked. When I called someone slow because they didn't understand a math problem right away. When I joked about someone's clothes without realizing their family couldn't afford more. I had built a pattern. I used words like weapons and then hid behind the excuse of being funny or real. But the truth was, I hadn't fought at all. The next day, I tried to say sorry to Jenna. I walked up to her slowly before class. She looked up but didn't smile. "Hey," I said, my voice low. "About yesterday, I'm really sorry. I wasn't thinking. That joke, it wasn't okay." She looked at me for a long second. "It really hurt," she said quietly. I nodded. I know it did." She didn't say she forgave me. She didn't smile or hug me or tell me it was okay. But she didn't walk away either. That was something. After that, I started noticing everything more. Not just my own words, but other people's reactions. I'd say something, and then I'd look around the room. Did someone flinch? Did someone's smile fade? Did the air feel heavier? I paid attention, and what I found surprised me. I wasn't the only one hurting people with my words, but I was one of the few who actually felt bad about it. At home, I began noticing how I snapped at my little brother when I was tired. I told him to shut up once when I was doing homework, and he left the room silently. Later, I heard him talking to our mom, saying, "Scarlett's mad at me again." It broke my heart. I wasn't mad at him. I was just careless. I realized something else too. Sometimes it wasn't even what I said, but how I said it. My tone, my expression, the speed of my words, they all carried weight. A sharp whatever could feel like a slap. A sarcastic good job could ruin someone's whole day. The more I saw this, the more I hated the version of myself who didn't care. I didn't want to be feared. I didn't want to be the girl people avoided because they didn't know if I'd embarrass them in front of others. I wanted to be kind, thoughtful, respectful, but I didn't know how to start. So I did something small. I paused. Just 1 second. That's all I promised myself. Before I said anything, I would pause for 1 second and ask myself, why am I saying this? Is it helpful or hurtful? It wasn't easy. My mouth worked faster than my brain most days, but the pause, it was like a tiny stop sign before a crash. It gave me just enough space to decide. Sometimes I said nothing. Sometimes I changed my words. Sometimes I stayed silent and just listened. People started noticing. One of my teachers said I seemed more patient lately. My mom asked if everything was okay because I wasn't yelling anymore. My friend said I was calmer, but it wasn't calmness, it was awareness. I was finally aware of how my words made others feel. And that one moment with Jenna, that one careless joke, became the turning point. I remember a few weeks later, a boy named Kyle dropped his tray in the cafeteria. Food spilled everywhere. Everyone started laughing. The old Scarlett would have joined in, maybe even said something like, "Nice move, genius." But this time, I didn't laugh. I got up, walked over, and helped him pick everything up. He looked shocked at first, then grateful. "Thanks," he said softly. Most people just laughed. I smiled. "It happens. Don't worry." That moment made me feel stronger than any joke ever had. I understood now. Words are power. They can lift or crush. And once they're out there, you can't pull them back. I had spent years speaking without thinking, and I had left behind little cracks in people's hearts. But now, I was learning something new, something important. I was learning to pause, to think, and that pause was about to change everything. After that moment with Jenna, something inside me shifted. I couldn't unsee the pain I had caused, and I didn't want to live with the guilt that followed me around like a shadow. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I needed to change. I needed to speak less carelessly. I needed to pause, but that was easier said than done. For someone like me, who had always spoken fast and without filters, slowing down felt unnatural. It was like trying to teach myself to walk again, but this time on a tightrope. Every step, every word needed to be balanced. My mouth used to work faster than my mind, and now I was trying to reverse that. The first few days felt like a war between my habits and my hope to grow. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror one evening, repeating the same sentence to myself. Think before you speak. Think before you speak. It became my quiet chant. I even wrote it on a sticky note and placed it on my bedroom wall. 3 simple words, but they carried a lifetime's weight. The first real test came the very next morning. At breakfast, my younger brother spilled his milk all over the table. Normally, I would have snapped, saying something like, "Can you be any clumsier?" or "Seriously, again?" It was automatic, the kind of thing I used to say without thinking. But this time, I caught myself. I felt the words rise in my throat like steam, ready to burst out. I paused. Just 1 second. And in that second, I asked myself a question. What will this do to him? It wasn't deep or complicated, but it was powerful. That pause, that tiny space between emotion and reaction, gave me control. I exhaled slowly and grabbed a napkin instead. I said calmly, "It's okay, let's just clean it up." He looked at me, surprised. "You're not mad?" "No," I said. "Accidents happen." And just like that, the whole morning felt different. He smiled, and I smiled back. It was such a small moment, but to me, it was huge. It was the first time I had won the battle against my old self. After that, I decided to make pausing a part of my everyday life. It didn't always work perfectly, but I tried. I practiced in school, especially during group discussions where I usually jumped to answer first. I began to wait a little, to listen more. Sometimes I would count in my head, 1, 2, just to give myself a little time before speaking. One time, in history class, the student gave an opinion I strongly disagreed with. The old me would have interrupted, rolled my eyes, or blurted out something sarcastic. But I waited. I paused. And in that pause, I heard something I hadn't noticed before. Fear in his voice. He wasn't trying to argue. He was just nervous, sharing his thoughts. When I finally spoke, I said, "That's an interesting view. Can I add something different to it?" The teacher smiled. The student looked relieved, and I felt proud, not just for staying calm, but for giving someone else the space I had once taken away so often. But the truth is, the hardest part of learning to pause wasn't at school. It was inside my own head. See, my thoughts used to rush like a waterfall. If someone criticized me or corrected me, I would instantly feel attacked. My heart would race, and I'd want to defend myself with a sharp reply. My brain would scream, "Say something back. Don't look weak." Learning to pause meant going against that voice. It meant being quiet when I felt loud. It meant holding my tongue when everything inside me begged to shout. It wasn't easy. One afternoon, my mom told me to redo a chore I had already done. She said I didn't fold the laundry properly. My first instinct was to argue, to say, "It's fine. Why do you always pick on me?" But I remembered the pause. I closed my eyes for half a second, breathed in, breathed out. Then I said, "Okay, I'll fix it." Her face softened. "Thanks, honey," she replied. That was all. No argument, no yelling. Just peace. That pause gave me power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from being louder than others, but the kind that comes from being in control of myself. And it began to change how people saw me. My teachers noticed. My classmates noticed. Even strangers noticed. One day, during a group presentation, one of our slides didn't load. Everyone panicked. The group leader started blaming the tech guy. Someone else started mumbling about restarting the laptop. I just paused. Instead of joining the noise, I said calmly, "Let's take a deep breath. We can explain the slide without it." My voice wasn't the loudest, but people listened. They stopped rushing. We continued the presentation and still got an A. After class, one of my classmates, Tara, came up to me. She said, "Scarlett, I wish I could stay that calm when things go wrong. I smiled and told her, "It's not calmness. It's just one little pause. That's all it takes." But of course, I wasn't perfect. There were still days when my old habits took over. Once, during an argument with a friend, I got frustrated and said something rude. I didn't pause that time. I reacted. I regretted it immediately. But I apologized and I forgave myself too, because I was learning. I reminded myself, one slip doesn't mean failure. Growth isn't a straight line. One of the things that helped me most during this journey was journaling. Every night, I wrote down one moment when I had paused and one moment when I hadn't. I would ask myself, how did I feel afterward? The answers were always the same. When I paused, I felt proud. When I didn't, I felt regret. Those pages became my quiet teacher. They showed me how far I had come. I also started watching people differently. I noticed who talked too much and who waited. I saw how the ones who took their time, who didn't rush to speak, were the ones others respected most. They didn't talk over people. They didn't interrupt. They spoke slowly, clearly, and only when they had something meaningful to say. That's who I wanted to be. And over time, I became more like them. Even my voice started to change. It became softer, slower, more thoughtful. And it wasn't because I was afraid to speak. It was because I had learned the power of choosing my words. One evening, my aunt visited us and brought up a sensitive topic at dinner. Everyone got tense. I could feel the room heating up. Normally, I would have said something just to break the silence, maybe even made a joke. But I didn't. I waited, and in that space of waiting, my dad gently changed the subject. The tension melted. Afterward, he looked at me and said, "Scarlett, I saw you were about to say something. I'm glad you didn't." I just smiled. He didn't know that inside me, a little battle had been won. The more I practiced, the more I realized that pausing wasn't just about avoiding mistakes. It was about creating room for better things. A pause gave me time to choose kindness over sarcasm, patience over anger, honesty over ego. It also helped me build deeper relationships. People began trusting me more. Friends opened up about their problems, knowing I wouldn't rush to judge. My cousin even said once, "Talking to you is easy now. You don't interrupt anymore." That sentence stayed with me. You don't interrupt anymore. It sounds simple, but it meant the world. Because interrupting was what I used to do all the time, not just with words, but with actions. I interrupted people's feelings, their peace, their space, and now I was learning to give space instead of taking it. By the end of that school year, I had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I didn't become perfect, but I became better, more aware, more present, more gentle with my words. And all of it began with one small habit: the pause, a second of silence, a breath, a decision. That pause helped me go from being the girl who hurt people with careless words to the girl who people trusted with their thoughts. And little did I know, this habit would soon teach me something even deeper: how to listen more than I speak. Before I learned to pause, I believed that being a good communicator meant having the right words at the right time. I thought talking a lot made me smart, quick, impressive. But once I started learning the power of thinking before speaking, something unexpected began to happen. I started hearing things I never noticed before. Not just people's words, but their emotions, their fears, their silences. That's when I understood. Real communication is not about speaking well. It's about listening deeply. I used to be the girl who filled every silence. I didn't like quiet moments in conversations. If someone paused, I jumped in. If someone struggled to explain something, I helped finish their sentences. If someone shared a story, I immediately shared one of my own. I thought I was connecting, but really, I was interrupting. One afternoon, I was sitting with my friend Maria in the school library. It was after class, and we were working on a group project. She seemed quiet, not her usual cheerful self. I noticed her hands were fidgeting with her pencil. Instead of asking how she was, I jumped right into the topic. I started talking about the presentation slides, the colors we should use, the transitions, the font size, all things that really didn't matter right then. She kept nodding, but her eyes looked empty. Then, suddenly, she said, "Scarlett, can I tell you something?" I paused and nodded. Of course. She took a deep breath. My mom is in the hospital. She had a fall. I've been so scared, and I didn't know who to talk to. In that moment, I froze. Not because I didn't care, but because I realized how close I came to missing it. I had almost drowned her voice with my own. I had been too focused on what I wanted to say instead of listening to what she needed to share. I sat quietly, letting her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to give advice. I just listened, really listened. That day, something shifted inside me. I started thinking about how many other times I had been too busy talking to notice when someone needed to be heard. I remembered my little brother trying to tell me about his day while I was texting, my grandma telling a story during dinner, and me cutting her off halfway because I already knew how it ended. My classmates trying to explain their ideas while I pushed mine louder. I felt ashamed. So I made a new promise to myself. I would start listening more than I talked. At first, it felt strange. In conversations, I'd catch myself wanting to jump in. I had to physically bite my lip, sometimes, or clench my hands to stop myself. I wanted to share, react, respond, but I held back. I waited, I watched, and slowly I discovered something magical. People began to open up to me. In the past, they'd talk fast, afraid I'd interrupt. Now, they took their time. They told me longer stories. They trusted me with things they hadn't shared before. One classmate even said, "Scarlett, you're so easy to talk to." That one sentence made my heart warm. I realized that listening is more than just being silent. It's being present. It's eye contact. It's nodding gently. It's saying, "I hear you," without always needing to say more. I began to notice people's faces more. The way their eyebrows moved when they were nervous. How their lips trembled when they tried not to cry. How their fingers tapped on desks when they were anxious. All these signs had been there before. I had just been too busy talking to notice them. One of the biggest lessons came during a group debate in English class. I was partnered with Liam, a quiet, smart guy who rarely spoke. Our topic was about social media and mental health. I had a bunch of strong points prepared, and I was excited to start. But when we sat down to plan, I said, "What do you think we should focus on?" He looked surprised. "You want to hear my idea first?" "Of course," I replied. He smiled softly and shared an idea about how online validation can affect self-worth. It was thoughtful and deep. I listened carefully, asked him questions, and let him lead the plan. The day of the debate, we presented our points together, smoothly. We didn't argue, we took turns. We respected each other's timing. Afterward, the teacher said, "That was the best balanced team presentation I've seen all year." I looked at Liam. He looked at me. We both smiled. After class, he told me, "Most people just talk over me. Thanks for listening." That sentence stayed with me. Because that's the thing about listening. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. But it speaks volumes to the person who feels heard. Listening also made me more patient. In conversations where people were slow to express their thoughts, I waited. I didn't rush them. I gave them space. And in return, they gave me their honesty. I began to notice how many people around me were desperate to be heard. Not because they needed advice, but because they wanted someone to sit with them in their silence, to witness their pain, joy, or fear. And I was finally becoming that person. Even at home, things changed. One night, my mom looked tired. She was making dinner, and I noticed her shoulders slumped. Normally, I would have asked, "What's for dinner?" and gone back to my phone. But that day, I sat at the counter and just asked, "How was your day?" She looked surprised. "Busy," she said, "but it's okay." I didn't say anything back. I just nodded and waited. Then she said, "Actually, it was really hard. Work was stressful. I feel like I'm doing everything alone sometimes." I listened. I didn't tell her to relax. I didn't change the topic. I let her vent. And by the end of it, she looked lighter. She smiled. "Thanks for listening, sweetie," she said. "I really needed that." It hit me then. All these years, I had been talking so much, but I had missed the voices that mattered most. I also started noticing how people appreciated the little moments when they felt heard. A girl in gym class, who always stood alone, smiled when I complimented her effort during a game. A classmate who stuttered took his time explaining a science question to me because I didn't interrupt once. A boy in my art class, who always looked anxious, told me about his favorite hobby, drawing dragons, just because I asked and really listened. All these moments taught me that listening wasn't about me. It was about giving other people the space to be seen, and in that process, I changed too. I became more thoughtful, more calm, more curious. I stopped assuming I knew everything. I started asking more questions, real ones. Not just "how are you," but "how are you really?" Not just "what happened," but "how did that make you feel?" The answers were always deeper than I expected. Of course, I still made mistakes. Sometimes I'd cut someone off without meaning to. Sometimes I'd get excited and talk too much. But the difference now was that I noticed, and I apologized. "Sorry, I interrupted you. Please go on." "Wait. I want to hear the rest of what you were saying. I spoke too much just now. What were you going to say?" These little phrases became part of my conversations, and people appreciated them. They smiled. They relaxed. They opened up more. Listening also helped me understand myself better. When I was quiet, I had time to reflect. I noticed my emotions more. My thoughts became clearer. I started journaling, not just what I said, but what I heard that day. A kind word, a sad story, a funny moment. I filled pages with the voices of others, and somehow they helped shape my own. One evening, I was on the phone with my cousin Leah. She was crying because her best friend had stopped talking to her. I stayed silent and just let her cry. I didn't say, "It'll be fine." I didn't say, "You'll make new friends." I just said, "That must really hurt." She cried harder. "It does," she whispered. "Thank you for saying that." That moment taught me more than any book ever had. It taught me that sometimes people don't need solutions. They just need someone to sit with their sadness. I used to think I needed to be the smartest voice in the room. Now, I know that being the quietest and most present is even more powerful. And strangely enough, by listening more, I became a better speaker. My words carried more meaning because they came from a place of understanding. I didn't just talk to talk. I talked to connect. Today, when I walk through school, I no longer try to be the loudest in the group. I don't fight to be heard. I don't rush to fill the silence. Instead, I watch, I wait, and I listen. Because I've learned something truly life-changing. When you really listen to others, they'll start listening to you too. It's strange how quietness, which once made me feel invisible, eventually became my greatest strength. There was a time in my life when silence felt like failure. If I didn't speak up, I felt like I was missing something. If I didn't comment, join, explain, or share, I believed I was being weak. I thought confidence meant always having something to say. So I filled every moment with words, thinking that was how people would see me and remember me. ... But after I started learning how to pause, after I truly began listening to others, something inside me shifted. The more I listened, the more I realized how many things I used to say were not necessary. I noticed how often I repeated myself, how often I spoke just to be heard, not to be helpful. And most of all, I started to see the quiet people differently. There was a girl in my literature class named Naomi. She barely spoke in group discussions. She just sat with a small notebook, writing something quietly. I used to think she was shy, or maybe uninterested. But then, one day, our teacher asked her to share her thoughts on a poem we were studying. She spoke slowly, clearly, and briefly. And what she said was the most thoughtful, beautiful analysis anyone in the room had offered. Everyone turned and looked at her. We were stunned. She said so little, yet her words stayed in the room like a soft echo. It made me think, what if the strongest people are not the loudest, but ... But the most intentional? That evening I thought about my own voice. I began to ask myself, what if I spoke less, but said more? So I tried something new. I stopped jumping into every conversation. I stopped trying to always lead. I began choosing silence when I didn't have something meaningful to add. It felt uncomfortable at first, like I was disappearing. I worried that people would think I had nothing to offer. But surprisingly, the opposite happened. People started noticing me more, not less. They began to listen when I did speak, because I wasn't talking all the time anymore. My words carried weight, simply because they were no longer used so casually. I wasn't competing for attention. I was giving myself permission to speak only when it felt right. And in that space, I found strength. One afternoon, during lunch, some friends were talking about someone in another class. Gossiping, really. My old self would have joined in quickly, adding something funny just to fit in. But that day, I stayed quiet. I didn't nod, I didn't laugh. I just listened, and when someone asked, "What do you think, Scarlett?" I calmly said, "I think we should give people the same kindness we want for ourselves." It was quiet after that. No one pushed the topic. A couple of girls looked down, but no one mocked me or pushed back. And that moment became a turning point. I learned that you don't need to say much to be heard. You just need to speak with honesty. Another time, in science class, the teacher asked a tough question. Everyone looked around, confused. I knew the answer, but instead of blurting it out like I used to, I waited. I wanted to give others a chance. A boy next to me, Jeremy, raised his hand slowly and said the answer correctly. The teacher praised him, and Jeremy beamed. Later, he said to me, "You knew that one, didn't you?" I smiled. "Yeah, I did. But I thought maybe someone else should get a chance this time." He paused and said, "Thanks." That meant a lot. It wasn't a big moment, but to me, it was everything. I realized that strength isn't just about being right or being first. Sometimes it's about stepping back so others can shine. The more I practiced silence, the more peaceful I became. My mind didn't feel as busy. My heart didn't feel as heavy. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just being. And in that stillness, I discovered something no one had ever taught me. Silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you powerful. At home, things changed too. My relationship with my parents got better. We didn't argue as much. I stopped speaking out of emotion and started thinking about what I wanted to say and how to say it kindly. When my dad gave me advice, I didn't roll my eyes or talk back. I listened. I let his words settle. And because of that, we began to understand each other more deeply. He even said one day, "You've grown up a lot lately. I'm proud of how thoughtful you've become." That sentence meant more to me than 1,000 compliments about how clever or funny I used to be. Even my younger brother began coming to me more often, not just to play, but to talk. One night, he came into my room and said, "Scarlett, can I tell you something without you teasing me?" I nodded and smiled. Always. He told me about a friend who had said something mean at school. He said it made him feel small. Instead of giving him a lecture or a joke, I just sat next to him and listened. I waited before I spoke. Then I said, "Sometimes people hurt others when they're hurting too, but your feelings matter. I'm proud of you for telling me." He looked at me, then hugged me. "Thanks for not making fun of me." That hug was the proof. I didn't need sharp words or fast comebacks to be strong. I just needed to be present, kind, honest. In school, teachers started calling on me not because I raised my hand all the time, but because they knew when I did speak, I had something thoughtful to share. One of them once told me, "Scarlett, you speak with maturity beyond your age. You don't speak often, but when you do, everyone listens." That made me feel powerful. Not the kind of power that shows off, but the kind that sits quietly and knows its worth. I also learned that speaking less made room for learning more. I started noticing small details I used to miss. The way someone's voice shook when they were nervous, or how someone's smile faded when a joke went too far. I started understanding people better because I wasn't always trying to be the center of attention. And most importantly, I started understanding myself. Silence gave me space to know my own thoughts. I journaled more. I spent time just sitting with my feelings. I realized that sometimes the words I wanted to say weren't ready yet, and that was okay. Waiting made my words wiser. One day, during a group meeting for a charity event, 2 girls started arguing about who should lead the team. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Everyone looked uncomfortable. In the past, I might have picked a side, jumped in with a smart comment, tried to fix it quickly. But instead, I waited. I watched. And then, when it was quiet, I said, "What if we stopped thinking about who's leading and started thinking about who we're helping?" Everyone looked at me. Then slowly, heads nodded. The tension faded. The girls apologized to each other. Later, someone said, "Scarlett, you always say the right thing." But it wasn't about saying the right thing. It was about waiting for the right time. And that's what I had learned. Timing is everything. Not every moment needs words, and not every thought needs to be spoken. My strength now came from patience, from calmness, from thoughtfulness. Of course, I wasn't silent all the time. I still laughed, joked, shared stories. But I had learned to hold back when it mattered. I had learned that I didn't need to explain everything, that not every opinion needed to be spoken, that some things are more powerful when they're felt, not said. By speaking less, I gained more peace, more respect, more understanding, more connection, and most of all, more of myself. Because when you stop trying to fill every silence, you begin to hear your own true voice. The day I realized that people were beginning to respect me, not for how loud I was or how quick my words came, but for how carefully I spoke, was one of the quietest, simplest days of my life. There was no spotlight, no round of applause, just a deep feeling in my heart that I had changed, and people around me had started to feel it. For so long, I had thought that if I wasn't bold or funny or full of opinions, I wouldn't be noticed. I was scared that careful words made you soft, and soft meant weak. But after learning to listen more, after learning to hold silence like a gift, I began choosing my words differently. I wasn't quiet out of fear anymore. I was careful out of respect, both for others and for myself. And slowly, I saw how that care created something even more powerful than attention. It created trust. It started small. In group projects, my classmates began asking what I thought before moving forward with ideas. They would say, "Scarlett, do you think this sounds fair? Or should we say it like this? Or is that too harsh?" It surprised me the first few times. I wasn't used to being the one people checked in with for emotional clarity. I had once been the girl whose words made people nervous. Now I was the one helping others speak gently. I still remember a moment that deeply moved me. It was in our history class where we had to give speeches on global leaders. One boy, Alex, was really nervous. He had a stutter that came out when he was under pressure. And even though he was smart and well-prepared, the fear of judgment made him sweat as soon as he stood in front of people. When his turn came, some kids whispered and snickered before he even opened his mouth. I felt something rise in me, not anger, but courage. When he got to the front and froze, I gently said from my seat, "Take your time, Alex. We're listening." It was such a simple sentence, but everything shifted. The class got quiet. He looked at me and gave a small nod. He took a deep breath and started speaking, slowly but clearly. And when he finished, we clapped, genuinely, warmly. After class, he walked over and said, "I almost sat down without finishing, but you gave me space. Thank you." I didn't say much. I just smiled and said, "You did great." And that was the moment I knew. ... Careful words create safe spaces. After that, more people began coming to me. Not because I had all the answers, but because they knew I would listen and speak with kindness. One girl, Tiana, who I barely knew, came to me after school one day and said, "Scarlett, you always know how to say things without making people feel small. Can I talk to you about something?" I was surprised. Of course. She shared how her parents were going through a divorce and how lost she felt. I didn't give her advice. I didn't tell her what to do. I just listened, held her story with care, and said, "That's a lot to carry, but you're not alone." And that was enough. In time, even my teachers began to treat me differently. One afternoon, our English teacher pulled me aside after class and said, "Scarlett, I've seen such maturity in your communication this year. You've grown into someone people listen to, not because you demand it, but because you speak with care." That compliment meant more than any grade or trophy ever could, because I knew what it meant to speak carelessly. I knew the harm a quick tongue could cause, and now I was becoming someone who helped others feel safe, not scared. One of the most powerful things I noticed was how speaking with care affected conflicts. In the past, if someone disagreed with me or said something harsh, I would shoot back with something equally sharp. It was like a tug-of-war of words. Whoever pulled harder won. But now I approached conflict differently. If someone raised their voice, I lowered mine. If someone threw blame, I looked for the real reason behind their anger. If someone made a mistake, I offered understanding instead of judgment. One time, a classmate named Brianna got frustrated during a project and accused me of not doing my part. In front of others, she said, "Scarlett, you just sit there like you're better than all of us." The old me would have gotten defensive. Maybe I would have snapped back, or laughed it off, or stormed out. But I stayed calm. I looked her in the eye and said, "I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I care about this project too. Let's figure it out together." Her face changed. The tension broke. She sighed and said, "Sorry, I guess I'm just stressed. I didn't mean it like that." And that was it. No fight, no drama, just honesty, softened by care. What surprised me most was that speaking with care didn't make me less respected. It made me more respected. People started trusting me, not just with small things, but with important conversations. When my cousin came out as gay, he told me first, "Because I know you won't make it weird," he said. "You won't joke. You'll just hear me." When my teacher got sick and needed someone to quietly help keep the class organized without making a big show of it, she asked me. When a younger student was being bullied in the hallway, it was me she ran to. It was never about being perfect. I still stumbled. I still said the wrong thing sometimes. But I caught myself quicker. I apologized faster. I chose softness over pride. One night at dinner, my mom asked me, "Scarlett, you're so different these days. Quieter, but in a strong way. What changed?" I thought for a moment and replied, "I just started thinking more before I speak. That's all." She smiled and nodded. It shows, and it's beautiful. The thing about speaking with care is that it's not just about what you say. It's about how you say it and why. It's about being honest without being harsh, brave without being loud, clear without being cold. And most of all, it's about making people feel seen, not scared. Once during an assembly, the speaker said something that stuck with me forever. She said, "Words are seeds. What you plant grows. So be careful, because what you say can either grow flowers or thing." I held that sentence in my heart like a reminder. Every time I was about to speak, I asked myself, am I planting flowers or thorns? And because of that, I started choosing words that healed, not hurt. Compliments that felt real. Apologies that were sincere. Encouragement that was quiet but steady. Boundaries that were calm but firm. And over time, people began seeing me, not as someone who talked too much or said whatever she wanted, but as someone they could trust with their truths. I wasn't perfect. I didn't always get it right, but I was learning. And in learning, I had changed. I used to think respect came from being loud. Now I know it comes from being kind. Looking back, I smile at the girl I used to be, the one who rushed her words, filled every silence, and believed that speaking fast and often was the key to being strong. I wasn't a bad person back then. I just didn't understand the weight that words could carry. I didn't know that a single sentence could lift someone or break them. I didn't know that sometimes the loudest voice isn't the one that speaks, but the one that listens. This journey changed me, not all at once, but slowly, gently, lesson by lesson. I learned to pause. I learned to wait. I learned to listen not just with my ears, but with my heart. And when I did speak, I chose words that built bridges, not walls. I became the kind of person others could trust. Not because I always had the right thing to say, but because they knew I would speak with care. My voice didn't have to be loud to be heard. It had to be kind, honest, thoughtful, and that was enough. I used to think strength meant saying everything that came to mind. Now I know real strength is saying what matters and letting silence hold the rest. If there's one thing I hope my story shows you, it's this. You don't have to speak often to make a difference. You just have to speak with heart. So the next time you feel the urge to rush your words, to react without thinking, or to fill the silence just to be heard, pause. Just pause. Breathe. Think first. And speak smart. Because that's how your voice becomes something unforgettable.